Hello, mentors. Welcome to our podcast series, Mentorships in Education, brought to you by Just Education at justeducationfirst.com. I am your host, Judith Epstein. I am very excited about the wide range of experts who have volunteered to give up their time and expertise. They will share their innovative ideas, their exciting perspectives, their rich resources, and their research with us. Please continue to delve into these topics on their websites and with your legal counsel, healthcare provider, and education professional. Our guests will have information that will be relevant to mentors supporting struggling students, parents, teachers, administrators, legal support, and health professionals. We will address all levels of education with issues that affect academic performance. Our goal is to open discussions and introduce a variety of approaches to those searching for information in a free venue. So mentors, let me introduce our guests for today. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Mentorships in Education. This is our first podcast for the new season. It's been rather an emotional couple of months for me, and I want to thank everyone who checked in with me to see what was happening with my podcast, because I usually do one starting in September. And it was really a good feeling to know that people were checking up on me and reaching out, that my absence was noticed. So I really appreciate that. I want to thank so many people from all over the world, again, who have reached out to me over the summer and have told me that they'd be interested in being on my podcast. And they want to share their information and encourage those who need encouragement. And I am so appreciative of everyone who's willing to give their time. I am eternally grateful. Today, we have a guest that I'd like to kind of get into a little bit of an introduction. I'm going to talk a little bit more than I usually do because I had an aha moment with our guest that I want to share. Dyslexia is a diagnosis that often brings confusion, trepidation, and in some cases sadness to parents and children. But when we look further, we find that some of the most creative, successful, and interesting people were dyslexic. Take, for example, Walt Disney, Albert Einstein, Leonardo da Vinci, Richard Branson. Yes, Richard Branson. Did you know that? He dropped out of school at 16. Or Whoopi Goldberg. Right. You can look them up. There are just too many for me to mention, but there are many, many. Our guest today, Mike Thomas, is himself a dyslexic. I invited him on as a way of introducing his alternative approach to learning from one who can speak personally about his journey. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Mike, and then I have something to share about him personally, for me. As a dyslexic child, Mike, in the late 40s and 50s, was faced with trying to make sense of his disability. At that time, there was no name for what he had, even though he knew something was wrong with him. And even though no one knew what was wrong, he still faced an overwhelming task of trying to figure out how he was going to learn to read so that he could have a normal life. With the help of his loving family and support from teachers and friends, he was able to succeed in reaching a functional level of reading, although he still says it's a challenge. As a result, in 1967, he earned a BS degree in disorders. He taught at a psychological clinic school in UCLA, and then he took a job as a physiological social worker. Boy, those are all twisting words. I have to be careful. In training school for juvenile delinquent boys, many of the boys had the same problems he had, so he was able to relate to them. He did a lot of tutoring in Nashville in the 1980s, and again, because of the skills he learned, he decided that he was going to share some of those skills with these students, and he was amazed at the effect that it had. Hi, Mike. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Hi. How you doing?
You have written a wonderful book, and I want to share with our listeners that I try and read all of the material that is shared with me by my guests, and I get books and I try and read them all. And sometimes it's more related to me, and sometimes it's not related to me, but I still try to take an interest in what someone is willing to share with me. And so I addressed the book that you shared with me with the same sense of duty that I needed to read it because we were going to be chatting. And I want to share with our listeners that as I began to read your book and understand your journey, tears came to my eyes because I said, this is my journey. This could be my book. While you have dyslexia, I have ADHD. And I'll let you talk about it, but there are so many similar things. You repeated a grade. I repeated a grade. You had difficulty in school. Teachers didn't know how to work with you. You were pigeonholed in some respects. I was pigeonholed in some respects. And a teacher is the one who helped turn me around. And I know that you had a teacher that helped turn you around. Really, I read the book and tears came to my eyes. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about your school experience and some of your challenges. And I want you to speak to the trauma that you allude to in your book. So why don't I'll stop talking, and I'd like you to kind of introduce your background a little bit so that we can get a better sense of where you came from and help us understand where you are now.
Well, thank you, Judith. Really, I was born in 1944, just before the end of World War II, which makes me 77 years old. So I've been around the block a few times, and I was afforded the great opportunity to be challenged in my life. And I say that a great opportunity to be challenged because we are all challenged. Sometimes life is too much for us. And up until a certain point, it certainly was for me. When I started school and everybody started reading, and I was looking at the words on the page, and 1 second I would see Saul, S-A-W, and the next I would look back and it was. Well, I was completely confused.
Mm-hmm.
And all the other kids were just going ahead and reading it. And I didn't know what it was until I stumbled through the sentence and I looked back 50 times. I sent you a graphic of what a dyslexic sees when they look at text.
Yes, and I want to tell our listeners that there will be a tab where they can click on that and look at it while you are talking.
Well, when they see it, they're going to see text, and the text is jumping around. It's vibrating. The letters going back and forth inside the words, and I didn't understand how anybody could make any sense out of that. They were reading and I couldn't, and my only thought was, I must be really dumb. Now that's critical because it determines the life of a dyslexic child. Now, you know, and I know, and some of the listeners understand that dyslexia is a broad term. It is
Yes.
not a specific set of things like, the symptoms of pneumonia or
right. It's not a checklist. Right.
Not a checklist type of thing. It's on the autism spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And at one end, you're going to see acute autism, and somebody that's totally shut down. And on the other end, you're going to have ADHD. And the reason for this and the dyslexia is all of the middle ground. Okay, all of it. But I was told at UCLA when I was taking a course in learning disorders, and my degree is in physiological psychology and learning disorders.
Okay.
And I was astounded. They were the very first ones doing any kind of work with autism. Back in 1966, they were cutting edge. And I assume they still are. But the great thing about that was they were seeing that it was really a matter of filters. And when I say filters, we are all bombarded by stimuli internally and externally all of our lives. And normally we have the ability to filter out everything that's not relevant and focus on something that is. But with autism, the extreme autistic child is not able to filter anything out, and they get swamped, they get overwhelmed. And on the other end, you have ADHD, where somebody is just missing a few filters and they get easily distracted. Now, by definition, that makes everything in the middle kind of broad. I missed this one, but I got that one. I don't have this set, but I got that set of filters. And that's dyslexia. And basically, it is a symbol processing disorder. Most people learn over here to read.
And you're pointing to the left side of your head.
Your left side of my head.
Yes.
And left brain. And then, but we learn up on the right side of our brain and right next to the creative center. So a lot of the people that are dyslexic are also very creative because it's all mixed up together in a lot of ways. And it's not a malady in the sense that it is, it's partially a gift as well as being a disorder.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have that creativity. It's not a matter of being dumb, although we find that we think that we're dumb when we look at that text and it's jumping around and we can't read and these other kids can. We think we're dumb. And that is the critical aspect. We think we're dumb. We do not know how to learn, and we can't master the skills that ordinary kids can with that ease. And
that's one of the things that I relate to, because when I was at school and was struggling, so I also thought I was dumb. And I turned out, and my parents had me tested. This is all, you and I are about the same age.
Yeah.
And my parents had me tested at the Boston Children's Hospital, and my IQ is significantly above average. And they said there wasn't any reason why I couldn't intellectually do the work. I was just socially immature. And when I learned to appreciate an education, I would start putting more effort into it, doing well. And so I became the social butterfly in the class. And I understand you became the class clown.
I did. And, you bring up a very good point, because naturally there are different ways that we can react to our own dyslexia, depending on how severe it is or how mild it is. And we can usually compensate by becoming the social butterfly, the class clown, the football star, the gymnast, the great swimming star, something to do other than reading.
Right.
It is not reading dependent. And so that's where we normally gravitate. But there's only 3 roads that a dyslexic child can walk down. Okay? Road number 1 is what we did. We compensated. We learned to compensate. Road number 2 is we drop out. We get so depressed and so swamped, we just drop out. We might want to be a doctor. We say, I can't do that. And we'll just go over here and do this menial job because we can do that. We don't have to read.
Right.
Other one is, and I found this in the boys training school when I was that psychological social worker at the training school, and I had 167 juvenile delinquents to counsel. Yeah, now that's a caseload. That's way beyond normal. But the thing was, I found most of them had trouble in reading, and most of them had so many failures in school that their reaction was, I don't need this stinking school. I don't need an education. I will just go be a bully, or I'll go to the street corner and sell drugs with my friends. And those kids wind up in training school, and then they graduate to prison. I had one kid, I think I mentioned in the book, that was 18, and he was graduating from, we could no longer hold him in the training school. And he had spent all but 4 months of his entire life in one institution or another: foster homes, orphanages, training schools, everything like that. He did not know how to function in the real world because he had never lived in it. And he'd always had the great, people of the training school or something telling him what to do and when to do it and feeding him 3 squares a day. It took him 4 months after he was out to get into enough trouble to get sent to the prison, the state prison, where he knew how to function.
I know sometimes these kids do that, and that's also something that we have in common. I taught in a DYS center. I used to teach in alternative kids schools while kids were remanded by the courts. I taught in a community that had gang kids coming in and out. And, they very often they would say, I don't need any of this BS. It's not something I'm going to be using. I know what I'm going to be doing when I get out of here. And I have the skills to do what I want to do, and I don't need to learn, these other things that you're trying to teach me. And it was a big challenge to try and work with some of the kids to show them that they had talent beyond what they, and were capable beyond what they thought they could do. And it is this, with the dyslexia is a big issue. ADHD is also a big issue. These were kids that were jumping all over the place. They couldn't sit still. They couldn't focus. One of the kids used to come in and say to me that, he was up all night because he couldn't sleep. And, the parents don't have the money or the skills or the time in many cases to be able to address any of these issues. So, and this is going on today. This wasn't just back in the 40s and 50s.
And you bring up a very, very good point. And that is, people don't realize 1 out of 5 children is dyslexic or ADHD. They're on the autism spectrum.
Right.
And this is across all lines and is 20% of the world's population.
Wow.
This is just the way we are born and the way we are. And we hear all the time teachers talking about the great challenge of education today and how we have so many kids failing the basics. And they can't get out of school because, they've got this great failure rate. The problem is not that they are stupid, not that they cannot learn, but dyslexics learn differently. We don't learn like everybody else. And the research shows that dyslexics cannot learn, not will not, cannot learn through traditional teaching methods. Now, the teacher only knows how to teach traditional because 99.9% of all teachers are not dyslexic.
No, they're not. But many of them are trying to learn.
They are trying.
They are trying, and it's up to the districts to give them the opportunity to do that.
Well, see, the problem is they are never taught. It's not their fault. They're never taught how to teach dyslexics because we learn differently, and we do not learn from traditional teaching methods. We don't have a learning problem as a dyslexic. Teachers have a teaching problem that they were never trained to teach us, and they don't know how. And it took me a long time to figure out what was going on with me and to develop techniques that were good for my functioning that I could deal with. Now, I was going to be a doctor, psychiatrist. I was going to go to med school. I was going to do all of those things. But as I got up in the later years of college, I realized there was no way I could keep up with the demands.
That would be a challenge.
Because nobody diagnosed back then, in the 60s, what dyslexia was. It wasn't it wasn't a term that was used. And all these labels that were put upon this autism spectrum to describe different aspects of it weren't in existence.
Right.
At that time, there was autism, and ADHD didn't exist.
I'm sorry, but you mentioned to me when we were talking a story about a girl in Italy. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Can you fit that into this?
I can. We as dyslexics, being creative and having these choices of which road we're going to go down, and some of us, our failure pattern is so great that it's terrible, and we get swamped and everything. But some of us that have the experience of a teacher like you did, and I did, and that teacher brought me in and said, I don't know what's wrong, but you have, you're in the 4th grade and you can't go to the 5th grade because you can't read. You need to learn how to read. And it was that moment, thank God, that I was faced with a decision. And that was to either get swamped and be a victim, or to determine that I was going to overcome this and I would defeat it. I would overcome it. I would do something. I would learn to read. And it's the change in attitude when I said I will not be a victim in this life that made that difference to where I started really working and focusing on what I could do. I got a letter, it was an email from the mother of a girl in Italy. And
it's a great story.
She wanted to thank me because her daughter had found my book online and Amazon and picked it up and read it. And it's a dyslexic friendly book.
It was inspirational.
It was to her, and she got everything about it. Dyslexics get the book. They understand, like it brought you to tears. It
did.
It reversed everything that she thought about herself. And she was so impacted by it that she actually translated it into Italian. She used it for the thesis presentation for her degree at the University of Pisa, and got her degree based on her translation of my book. And that made me feel so humble. And it gives me chills every time I say it. It's the honest God truth. And I feel like so many of the letters that I get are like that. And she and I have become very good friends and everything. The book has also been...
Give us the name. Give us the name of the book.
Okay, The Successful Dyslexic. I just happen to have
Successful Dyslexic.
Yeah.
And it's available on Amazon.
Yeah.
And they're not going to be able to see that, but they will have the link to be able to click on it and go and look at the summary to see if it might be supportive of what it is they're looking for. Talk to more specifically your method in the book that you subscribe
Thank
to,
you.
this short burst study method, the multisensory input, the breaking the pattern of failure, all these different components that you have?
Yes, the subtitle of The Successful Dyslexic, which is not about money success, it's about learning to be functional and having a better self-image and being successful at being functional. The subtitle is Practical Techniques for Dealing with Dyslexia in the Real World.
Okay.
All of the stuff that I was hearing about what was going on in schools was great, except for the fact that it didn't take into account the dyslexic. It wasn't doing anything for the kid. It was making the teacher's life easier, the administration's life easier, but it wasn't doing anything to help the kid. It was just, we're going to give you more time on the test or whatever. And that's all well and good. And there's nothing wrong with all of those things, but it doesn't really address the core issue. And the core issue is a pattern of failure that starts very, very, very early when we start into grade school. And we're in that first, second, third grade, and we start, depending on how severe the dyslexia is, we start failing. We start failing to be able to read, to do a test, or to do this or that because we misread it. And so we think we're dumb.
And you know what else, Mike, is other kids see us as being dumb. So
yeah, that's right.
We begin to see ourselves as dumb. We're very uncomfortable with not being able to perform. And then the rest of the kids begin to see us as dumb, and they validate our perception of ourselves.
Well, and the teachers do inadvertently. Quite often they say, well, there's no point in teaching Michael because he's too dumb to get it anyway. And that's what so many of them see. And the reason they see that is because not only are we failing, but we are hiding. And dyslexics are the great hiders. We hide behind being the social butterfly or the class clown or the football star or all of these other personas that we can take on that will distract everybody from seeing us as a total failure. And
or even misbehaving in class when the teacher says reading groups are going to be organized so that we get thrown out so that we don't have to deal with it.
Well, I had a call from a mother who actually was a teacher, and she had homeschooled all of her kids for years, and she had been a teacher in regular schools. And this was after COVID started and everything. And she had one child that was at that age. He was 10, and he had hit the wall. He couldn't read because he was reading on kindergarten level, and he had tried everything to be distracting, but because he was there, every time his mother would say it's reading time, he would throw a tantrum, kicking, screaming, biting, running out of the room, hiding, running away, not eating, whatever. And she called me out of desperation and said, "Can you tutor my child?" And I said, "No, but I can tutor the family." Because it's not a matter of this child doing something different.
Right.
We don't have a learning problem. They have a teaching problem. And when I started, and we met once a week for 10 weeks, and I talked to the parents. I didn't talk to the child. The child was off camera, and we were Zooming, and I was talking to them. I said, "What do you expect out of this child? You're asking him to do something he can't do."
Right. Okay? That's the key.
That's the key. And I said, before he can learn, you have to treat the trauma.
And it's not that they don't want to do it. It's that they can't do it. And
exactly.
And that's the idea, is that we need to recognize
Well,
that.
and the mother, I was a teacher, but she only knew how to teach traditionally.
Right.
And when I started talking to her and we went through the book and she understood, I said, your deal is you first have to show this child that you are trying to understand what's going on with him and become supportive. You have to be his ally. Otherwise, he sees you as his enemy.
So, Mike, I want to go back to some of the specifics about the book.
Yeah.
And I'd like you to explain this short burst study method.
Okay.
That you advocate.
When I was
yes.
I was known as the substitute teacher from hell in the high school because I had been a social worker in the boys training school. And I was the substitute teacher nobody wanted to get because I had a rule, and I started right in the fall, and I said, look, I don't get paid enough to put up with a bunch of guff. And if you don't act out and you are kind to your neighbor and you study and let them learn, I'll let you stay in class. But, after they gasped and thought, who is this guy? I said, there will be one chance. That is, if you act out or something like that, I will show you the door and say, you cannot get back in this class without a note from the principal. Showing that you've gone down there and you've explained your side of it. I'll be down there to explain my side of it. But I had to kick one person out of class. Just one. Because they had to try me. And that's reality testing. But once I did that, the other kids settled right down. And I taught every single day of the year, one class to the other. I was a professional substitute for a while. And I got a bunch of kids to tutor. Turns out most of them were dyslexic.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Yeah. So I shared with them the techniques that I had developed when I went to college, because I started out, I couldn't keep up with the demands of college. And so I had to teach myself how to learn differently. And part of that was the way I approached it. And the other part was the techniques I used. And you mentioned multisensory input. And I realized that each area of the brain has its own memory. For each, for your eyes, for your ears, and for your touch, all of those have a separate memory area for what, like when you play the piano, you have muscle memory.
Right. And that's one of your fortes. I know that we're very musical.
I am a musician, and that's exactly right. And I've spent the last 50 years as a record producer here in Nashville, Tennessee. So, but so much of it was about programming those memories. And that would be when I only had time to study the book once and my notes. And I would go and I would look at the text and read it, and I would write it down, and I would say it out loud. 3 memories that I was programming that were tied together, because my visual memory is almost non-existent.
But it's so interesting because my visual memory is almost non-existent, and I have to read things out loud so I can hear them. And then I recall them. When I recall them, it's because of the sounds and the words. And then I might be able to visualize, what it was I was reading. Yes. And I didn't realize until I started reading some of the things that you were stating about being dyslexic, how similar my challenge was to someone who was diagnosed or is dyslexic, and I think that's important for teachers to understand. Anyone working with kids is that because someone has a particular diagnosis, it doesn't mean that they're alone will benefit from the techniques that we are using, these multisensory techniques. Many children will benefit from them.
Yes,
the
yes.
multisensory approach.
And that's very, very true. Now, remember, when I was in school, they had the word dyslexia, but nobody used it because nobody was aware of it except a really small number of people in Orton Gillingham. And they were a specialized group that only existed here and there. But, when we got up to a certain place, the psychologist pounced on dyslexia and the autism spectrum, and they added labels like ADHD. That was not for our benefit. That is not an accurate diagnosis of anything. It is a label so that they can say what their interpretation of that is. So it doesn't have any relevance. Even dyslexia is a broad term.
Right.
It doesn't have any relevance to anything except the fact that we learn differently. Now, that's true of, you can say Asperger's or anything else, dysgraphia. All of those are labels that have been added on, not for our benefit, but for theirs. And,
So this short burst study method that you're talking about, I'm assuming that it has to do with take on little bits of information at a time.
Well, yeah.
And kids who have challenges, regardless of what those challenges are, could benefit from this. It's not just kids with dyslexia, but
all learning is a function of attention.
Right.
All learning is a function of attention and the quality of the attention. So high quality attention equals high quality learning. Okay. Low quality attention, you're looking out the window, you're wondering about this, that, and the other, and you're kind of going through the book. But low quality attention means low quality learning. Well, for me, I had to learn how to focus. I had to learn how to learn. I had to really be able to focus in on that. And I didn't know it then, but that was high quality attention. I was learning how to teach myself.
Kind of metacognition. You were thinking about the process of thinking.
Yeah. And the thing about it was, here again, I shy away from all labels. I don't like to use labels or diagnosis or anything else. I see it very holistically. And whereas we as dyslexic need to learn to focus and to learn to develop high quality attention, we can use these techniques in conjunction with that to teach ourselves. And because, look, how many young kids are easily distracted? All of them. Okay, and you're going to ask them to sit there for an hour and have focus and attention for an hour. Does not happen in this world, not in my lifetime. So I said, well, look, I'll just break it up because you have typically, and I was teaching school, you have an attention spike at the beginning of class, an hour class, which is a modulated spike of attention. Okay. What am I going to learn today? Okay. And then they say, okay, do this. So you go into that and your attention just sinks down below the line. And then 10 minutes are left and you haven't done anything and you get a big attention spike at the end. Well, all I did was I broke that up into 6 different 10-minute sections. And I only study for 10 minutes at a time.
Okay.
Okay. And that 10 minutes means that I have another attention spike, a little drop, and another attention spike at the end of the 10 minutes, which if you add it up over the hour, it means you got 12 attention spikes and only 6 small amplitude depressed areas where you are losing a little bit of focus.
Did you use a timer or something to keep
No,
track?
no. I know. I got it from my guitar playing. When I was playing guitar and learning guitar lessons, they said, don't do it for a long time. Do it in short segments of 10 minutes. Play and play and play, and then stop.
So it's kind of an average of 10 minutes, which it wasn't like you were watching a clock or something.
But
people could use, parents could, to encourage their children, they could say, look, just do it for 10 minutes. Let's set the timer. Let's use those things. Just so the child has some incentive.
It originated in Italy, that method as a business efficiency method, and it's called Pomodoro method. And Pomodoro means, tomato in Italian. And tomato is the timer.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
Okay, yeah. So you set the timer, and it looks like a tomato on your, shelf, right? Because it goes off at the end of it.
I find it's very effective if kids have difficulty, like working on a big project. When I speak with the parents, I say, just, have them work for 10 minutes on the project.
Right.
Let's set the timer, and they can just work for 10 minutes, and then they can take a break, and then they can go back and do it again. That's kind of what you're talking about.
Well, yeah, and all the seminars.
It doesn't look like such a big project.
But breakout groups typically at a seminar are going to be 10-minute sections or 15 at the max. And this group goes over here and they decide, well, you got 10 minutes, figure it out and then come back and we'll report. All the breakout sessions, all the efficiency sessions are based on short burst study method. Okay. And it keeps your attention up and you're more involved because you can hold your focus for a short time. Okay.
So when you talk about filters, you're saying that dyslexics, and I'll say me as someone with ADHD, we're missing that filter for helping us focus. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, very much so. And you take a kid. I remember one day I was sitting in 5th grade class. Okay. And we were supposed to be doing something, and I have no idea what we're supposed to be doing. But I was kind of off daydreaming. It started out as a beautiful day, and then it clouded up and it rained, and then the rain turned into snow, and and then it was back to sleet, and then it was back to kind of rain, and then the rain quit, and we went out for recess.
You definitely weren't living in the South at that time.
I was living in Oklahoma.
Oh,
I was born and raised in Oklahoma. And, Will Rogers notoriously said, if you don't like the weather in Oklahoma, just wait a minute. And well, that's the truth. This was with 1 hour, it went from sun shining to freezing to snow, back to sun shining in 1 hour. And that's typical. You don't think anything about it because the cold front blows through and all those things happen. But that's typical of Oklahoma weather. So
Oklahoma's definitely missing a filter too.
Yeah, well, thing was that I was so distracted by the fascination of all of these other things that I wasn't getting anything done.
Right.
Because I didn't have any focus and I didn't know how to focus. I was learning to focus at that time. And later I learned how to cut out the distractions and create filters for myself. And there's techniques that I describe in the book for creating filters and for creating a better focus that are in the book. And once you do that, you learn how to have and what to do with high quality attention.
So we've talked about in the book, parents and educators can read about how to apply some of the skills that you're advocating.
So there's 3 main points.
That's what I wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
What are the main things you want them to know?
My method, as I distilled everything down, was one, you have to treat the trauma first, because a kid that is traumatized is so distracted by all of the inner emotional stimuli that they're having to deal with that they have no high quality attention. So you have to get that trauma under control and mediated before any child can have any attention for something else. Now, with this kid up in Washington State, after 10 weeks, he came to his mother. The bad behavior had gone away. And he said, "Mom, will you teach me to read?" And she cried.
So how do you get rid of that trauma? What is it that you do?
What you do is the parents need to focus and the teachers need to focus on the enrichment aspect of the lesson, of the reading. You read to the child. You take the child. I went and I read about the Revolutionary War at Concord and the first shot heard around the world between the British and the Americans. And that was lovely. It's a great story. But it's entirely different when you stand on that bridge between Lexington and Concord and you see the British soldiers and you see the American soldier and you feel that whole situation and you hear that shot ring out. And it's an enriching experience. You understand on a much deeper level. That's enrichment. And anytime a child can have a parent that is focused on that, one, they feel like the parent is on their side. And instead of being an adversary, the parent becomes an ally. So and that is what you make yourself, is an ally to that child.
What's the second thing now that you...
The second thing is the parents need to learn how we dyslexics learn, and so does the dyslexic. They have to understand that they're not dumb, that they are very smart, they are capable of learning, and that they learn differently, and that this is how we learn. Dyslexics learn through conceptual ideas first. I said that very slowly. We learn through concepts. I call it the Christmas tree method. Most of the traditional teachers give you a bunch of facts and they assume that you're going to know how to put them all together. Doesn't happen with a dyslexic. We need the Christmas tree before we can know where to hang the baubles. Okay, the facts are the ornaments. The Christmas tree is the concept.
Right.
You know, and that's our gift. You know, Einstein was a wonderful conceptual thinker. He could think about gravity, about mass and time and speed of light and all of these ideas. And those were the big ideas. And he came to that because he was dyslexic. He had to compare this idea with this idea. Okay? So we all do that. We take something and say, well, what's the concept? What's the big idea? What's the big picture? Steven Spielberg is a wonderful director and writer of films, and he's dyslexic.
Is that the sometimes you hear teachers talk about, or educators talk about, the bottom up thinking or the top down thinking? And I always say, I need to know what the big picture is first. Then the facts will make sense to me. You can't give me. So is that what you're talking about?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, but I didn't know this, and teachers don't know that. They go to school and they are trained to teach facts.
Right.
That's what they're trained to do. You do this and then you do that. And then voila, you have the answer. That's mathematics. As you first do this step, then you do that step, and then voila, you got the answer.
Right.
you're on the board,
Right.
And that's not the way dyslexics learn. We got to be talking about, okay, we're going to get the circumference of a circle. How do we go about that? Then we can get the steps. But I always have to refer back to that big idea. They have to be put in context, or we don't get it. If the teacher, if the parent understands that, and we understand it, then we are learning on the same page.
So what's the third thing now? What's
the third thing is that once we have treated the trauma, and once we have learned how to learn, okay, then we can master skills like reading, writing, and arithmetic our way. We can learn those skills, which everybody has to learn, but we can't learn it unless we're taught our way, the way we learn.
And each dyslexic is different. Like each child with ADHD, it's not because it works with you, it might not work with somebody else.
Well,
everybody's a little different.
And every child, processes, it misses different filters.
Right.
So we got all these filters, and you're doing this, and I'm doing that.
Well, people aren't going to be able to see you, but you're holding up your fingers.
Oh, okay.
And you're trying to show how 2 or 5 or whatever you're talking about.
Yeah.
And dyslexics may not see the fingers the way you're holding them up.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying, if there's 100,000 filters, no two dyslexics are going to be missing the same filter.
Right.
It's like fingerprints. We're all individual.
Right.
And we're going to perceive the world differently based on our genetics and our experience.
So, Mike, if you have a few more minutes, and you would like to, we're going to talk again about your book. I'm going to ask you to mention the name of your book again.
Okay.
How to be a successful dyslexic.
Yeah, it's not how to be, but it's just the successful dyslexic.
The Successful Dyslexic.
And the website is thesuccessfuldyslexic.com.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
That's where I got it from. That's where I got it from.
Yes, and I built the website. It's funny, but if we treat the trauma enough to learn how to focus, and we learn how we learn, and we master these skills, we usually, like I've had great people that taught me how to write, and I've been a writer all my life.
Right.
And taught me how to do math. And all of that is in the book. It's all about teaching me how to solve the problems of the real world day to day, how to live in the real world and be functional.
Now, do you have is there anything we haven't covered yet? Any words of wisdom that you would like to share with teachers or parents? Something, concise that might put some things together for you?
There are, and that is that, if you go to the website, you can get the book on Amazon, and it's also available on audio at audible.com. And if you've got Kindle, it's free for Kindle.
Wow.
Users, okay. So it took me a long time to write this book, but I decided that I had to go ahead and write it. I wanted to write it for a long time, but I decided I better write it while I'm still breathing.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
That's a good idea. It doesn't do anybody any good if I'm not here.
No.
But I'm offering these classes, and the classes are for teachers. Okay. I have a class.
These are online classes that you're offering.
Right. They're both live and they are recorded. Okay.
Okay. You have videotape. You also have a videotape series.
Right. I'm developing the videotape series, but I do the live for any group that wants that. A little different. But then I also do it for parents of dyslexic children. And I teach them one-on-one, or soon there'll be a whole recorded series up there. And for the dyslexic themselves, I got a note from a guy the other day, and he said that he had found my book and he had read it, and he wanted to thank me for writing it because it meant so much to him personally. And then his wife read it, and she said, "Is this the way you are? I had no idea." And it made their relationship so much stronger because she finally understood who he was and where he was coming from.
Well, that's the way I felt when I read the book, so you can sign my name on that letter as well. Mike, I want to thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And I really appreciate that you were willing to come on and give of your time with all the things that are going on in our lives. I always say this, sometimes it's a challenge to make these sessions happen, and I appreciate your persistence and your continued enthusiasm through the whole process.
Well, I'm just sorry for your situation that you had to do so much shuffling, but I'm always available. Anything.
Thank you. Thank you. And I want to thank everyone for being with us today. I hope you'll continue to listen to Mentorships in Education with Judith Epstein. And we have an amazing lineup over the next few months of people who have been in touch with me who want to be on the podcast. So please continue to look for topics that are of interest to you. I will mention that we have done other guests that we have had who have discussed dyslexia and different aspects of it. So please, if dyslexia is a topic you're interested in, look back over the last year or two and you will find other people who have also contributed to this library of information. Thank you all for being with me. I hope you are all safe and that you stay connected. Thank you. Thank you, mentors, for being with us today. If you found this podcast of value, please visit justeducationfirst.com to subscribe to our blog and Mentorship and Education podcast, so that you may continue the exploration with us. Our goal is to provide a free treasury of information for our listeners, so they can become acquainted with the amazing resources that we have available to us. We want to thank all of our guests for giving their time and sharing their wealth of information with us. Please also visit their websites and explore more of their resources to further your pursuit of the topic. Hope to hear from you at justeducationfirst.com. Have a good week, and thank you.